Hello, everybody. My name is Mike Lagerquist. We're here today at Vine Faith in Action. And I say this every time we have him on here because it's true. One of our favorite presenters is here, Scott Kadelka, DNR naturalist working with the Minneopa State Park, Flandreau State Park, and I think there's another one that I always forget.
Yep, Fort Ridgely.
Fort Ridgely, there you go. All right, but he's got a great catalog of programs, and I've got a copy of that, and I go through it every couple of months, and we find one that's going to be fitting, and especially on a day like today when it doesn't feel much like spring. But Scott's going to tell us a little bit about signs of spring with an introduction with something that everybody always asks about. So he's put them into his program now. You're going to get a little update about what's happening out at Minneopa State Park, and especially as pertains to the bison out there. So I will step aside, Scott, and take it away.
All right. Well, thanks, Mike. I just wanted to say to you too, I have a nephew that is in second grade, and he is a big YouTube guy. And so he found your thing on YouTube, and he watched a couple of my presentations. So I thought that was pretty cool. Yeah, so good afternoon, everybody. It doesn't quite feel like spring, especially if you compare yesterday when we got those little snow flurries, but at least we're not up in northern Minnesota. They have a lot more snow up there. And what I thought I'd start through is just talk a little bit about what's happening out at Minneopa, and then just kind of compare, even though it doesn't seem that way, spring does happen relatively quickly. And so this was at the beginning of March. We still had snow on the ground, a lot of ice on our upper waterfalls. And here we are now in April. Really no ice to be found anywhere. Our falls are flowing at a pretty good rate. This is Tim Pulis' photo, friend of the Minneopas, great photographer. He shot this evening photo, as you can see the sun setting there to the west. Here's the lower of waterfalls again, beginning of March, lots of ice still on the creek, and then of course with the waterfalls.
Hey, Scott?
Yeah.
We are seeing the opening slide of your presentation.
Just the buffalo.
I am clicking on it. That help?
No, same thing.
I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to try start again. And hopefully, is that any better?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So, okay, we'll start over again. This is the upper waterfalls at the beginning of March. Like I said, plenty of ice. And do you see the next one here?
Yep.
There we go.
Yeah. All right. I might be a little bit slower behind you. So this was shot not that long ago, actually maybe a week ago. Tim Pulis, Friends of Minneopa, took it in the evening. You can see the sun setting there in the west, but no ice to be found anywhere. And then just tell me, here's another one. This is the lower waterfalls. Do you all see that one? So
Yep.
We got lots of ice again, beginning in March, moving on. And now what we got is all water, and you can see maybe a little sediment flowing with the water, but plenty of water flowing across our lower waterfalls. We call this Wilson's Pond. This is in the Bison Range. As you drive through up until about 5 years ago, this was dry. But again, beginning of March, ice across it. And there we go. So all water. In fact, the last time I was out there a couple weeks ago, I could start to hear the frogs and things are starting to stir. And then here's our bison in February. Frosty morning, as you can see, and plenty of snow on the ground. And of course, now they look completely different. I mean, if you go back and it just seems like even that fur, doesn't that fur seem thicker? And then just in that short little time, it almost looks like they got a haircut, but they haven't. This is another Tim Pulis photo. But again, just the difference that we can experience relatively quickly here. Just a few more shots. This is our breeding bull from Teddy Roosevelt, hiding behind some woody vegetation. He didn't want to show his face. And so what's missing on this photo? Anybody want to give me a guess?
Looks like a horn.
Yeah.
Oh,
So this does actually happen, not on a regular basis, but not unexpected. This is actually a female that came from another, I think this one came from the zoo in Rochester. And so must have got in a fight and pulled it off. What's surprising is that there was no blood or anything. And sometimes you'll see that, but that will grow back. So not a big deal. And then just looking at our yearlings and how much they have grown, and we'll be expecting calves here, I would imagine in another week, if not sooner. We're looking at 13, maybe up to 17 calves. So we're going to go, we're down to 32. Our max, we were at 46 because we had brought in some bison from other places, moved them around, sold a few. And so now we're down to 32, but we'll be right back, right up those high numbers. And that's okay, because when we have that many calves and that many young bison, we don't worry as much because they don't eat as much as our full grown bison. And then here's our breeding bull. So hopefully he's done his job, and he actually has, if you think about it. The first year he had 5 calves that he bred, 10 the second year, 13 last year. So he's doing exactly what we want. And then just to show you, if you don't know, we do have another waterfall. It's what we would probably maybe call a seasonal waterfall. This one is in our campground. It's actually an A-loop. So there's a path between A-loop and the group campground. And you'll see a trail as you walk across this little wooden bridge. And so there are still a little bit of ice. This was taken about a week ago. And caught this one about the same time, nice full moon. In fact, this would have been the end of March. So I think it was that last Monday in March. And I rode my bike out. It was about 5:30 in the morning, but a great morning to be riding your bike, because with that full moon, it's shown a lot of light, but managed to capture this a little later that morning. And so I'm going to do is I am going to stop sharing. I'm going to get rid of that one and hopefully be able to go to our signs of spring. And, you know, we all look forward. I think even myself, who loves winter, by the time snow is melting, it's kind of nice to have those longer days, that warm temperatures. And so I'm just going to go through some of the signs that I kind of picked up over the years that I feel like tells me that spring is coming closer all the time. So the big thing, of course, is our woodchuck or groundhog. Everybody see this one, shadow or no shadow? So we're moving forward here. And of course, the old tale is that, now if I can remember right, if it sees its shadow, it's going to be another 6 weeks of winter. Is that right? Yep.
right.
And then no shadow, then it means that spring is coming here. And I can't remember. Does anybody remember what the forecast this year was? I thought it was 6 more weeks of winter, but I'm not
Right.
sure.
Yep.
Yeah, you saw a shadow.
Yep, saw a shadow. And so this is actually the ideal behind this is you know, depending on where you are, came over from Europe. I think in Europe, they was a badger, if not mistaken. That's what the animal they looked at to see if spring was coming or not. And, you know, pre iPhones and pre-internet, you know, you had to have something to look forward to. So gathering in the village square and bringing a wild animal to see if it sees its shadow or not, you know, that was entertainment. So our woodchuck, we do have woodchucks, our groundhogs at Minneopa State Park. In fact, one year I found a family of all places. When you go down into the gorge and you're walking back over to the lower waterfall, they were actually in this sandstone outcropping, which is a really busy place. And they didn't last there very long before they decided to hightail it out. We usually see them at Minneopa in our out of the way places. There is where the former Minneopa Creek flows through, would be on the north side of the Waterfalls area. We usually see them there. We look for their dens and things like that. Robins, that has been traditionally what we think when spring is coming. But the thing is robins well overwinter. The main thing is as long as they have open water to drink from and a food source. And so if you think about the Minnesota River, we usually have places that have open water, plenty of berries and things like that. So it's not quite the sign that we think that once robins are here that spring has come. But I think the thing is we see they're more active, looking for worms and things like that as the ground unfreezes. And of course, difference between our male and female robins. How do we tell the difference?
Spider bit.
Yeah, very good. You guys thought you'd come here and you just sit there and not have to answer any questions, but that's not the way it works for me. Another sign, I think, just because of how loud they can be, and then the fact that they're setting up nesting right now in the local area, of course, is Canadian geese. We see them streaking across the sky, got that V shape as they fly. I live up in Skyline, and sometimes we'll walk down to the cemetery that's just below the hill here. And the caretakers hate Canadian geese because, of course, they're utilizing that area for feeding and stuff. And the amount of poop that we all know Canadian geese leave behind really gets them upset. So some mornings I'll actually see them out there trying to chase them away. And of course, they'll fly away for a while and then they'll come right on back. But they'll lose their flight wings and then they're starting to nest. And a lot of times you see more than 2 adults. They might have a third or even a fourth, but only one female will have their babies. Just the way Canadian geese are, they actually, when one member has to drop out, if they're injured or not, another member usually goes with them to stay with them. So
Now, Scott, I don't want to pick nits, but isn't it actually Canada geese?
Canada geese, there you go. Yeah, but being from North Dakota, we just call them
Okay.
Canadian geese.
Okay.
So I'm gonna blame that on my upbringing. Is that's where it is. But I like that, a little nitpicking. That's always good for me.
Well, as a former copy editor, we got caught on.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's very good. But I think another one, of course, is our red wing blackbirds. They're starting to nest. And I think the main thing is because the males with their bright red and orange shoulder patches, we really see that in the spring as they're trying to impress the females. And then when they're nesting, if you've ever been around red-winged blackbirds, when they're nesting, is they will not tolerate intruders. And so they like to come at you screaming and dive bombing you and things like that. And then I think always a good sign of fall is when they gather in bunches, and they'll be up to 10,000 red-winged blackbirds flying. If you've ever seen them, it's just amazing how they'll stay together and move. The other one is I didn't include it here, but if you've been to Swan Lake, like I have paddling, the yellow-headed blackbirds are pretty dominant there, so that's another good sign of spring. And then we're starting to see flowers, and one of the first, if not the first flower on the prairie is the passflower. Gets its name for usually showing up around Easter, even though we know Easter, I think, a month difference sometimes, depending on the year. But they're a low growing flower, which is not unusual. They're the only one out there, so they don't really have a lot of competition. They're really hard to find because they'll grow in that old dead grass from last year. Again, they don't grow that very tall. They have hairy stems that help them protect. But usually we start to see them before even the snow begins to disappear. This one is a good name for it, the snow trillium, because again, usually they start to pop up when there's still snow on the ground. At Minneopa, the passflower, we see them. They're in this old oak savanna we've had a lot of other woody vegetation growing. So usually it's hard to find them or even remember where they're at. Our trilliums, they're growing in our rocky sandstone areas, usually along the Minnesota River bluff line. That's where the sheep and cattle that the Setmans had couldn't graze. So that's where we see that. Again, low growing or low, they don't reach much in height. And it's easy really to walk past them without even seeing them there. But a beautiful flower, and they'll grow in patches and things like that. Bloodroot. We see these woodland flowers like the snow trillium before the leaves come out. They're going to get out before they lose that sunlight. Again, really low growing, as you can see this one among the leaves. This one is taken down in the gorge over at the Waterfalls area. And they got its name. If you look at that stem, it's kind of got the color of blood. But a lot of these early flowers, woodland flowers, are going to be white. And our Dutchman breeches, again, you can see it just really adds a lot of color to really a landscape that doesn't have much in the spring. And the Waterfalls area really is the place to be. Gets that name because of those petals looking like breeches. This is wild ginger, another early, and you can see why. If it's got those hairs on those stems, that really helps protect against as the temperatures drop at night. It's got, anybody know why it has such a low hanging flower? They want to guess? It's because its pollinators are usually beetles. So that's a good way for them to get up into their, for pollination. And they are not like the ginseng that would be used for Asian cooking, but some people do use them as spices, but not what we would see with ginseng. The running of the sap. Our sap in our trees last fall, as the leaves quit producing, it all goes down to the bottom of the roots. And then what happens is when we see days that get above 0 and then below 0, the sap starts moving up into the tree. And this one is really unusual. This is just a grove of trees that's popped up in an old field above our office. And I have a little path through there, and I one day cut this limb to make it easier for me to walk through. And the next day I came by, And so you can see that sap actually came up and then went through that cut. And so this is what I found is that's sap hanging from there. I didn't taste it because sap has sugar in it. I wasn't quite sure how it would taste because it's not a maple. And so that sap is moving up, and what happens then it stops during the night, and then it goes when it gets above 0. So that's when we start making maple syrup. This is the time of year, and it sounded like this was a good year where we had those days. If it stays above freezing, the sap quits running. So it has to get above 0 or freezing point, and then get below, 32 degrees, get above that, and then below that at night. And then what you're doing is you're boiling off the water, and you're just leaving that sugar. That's why maples are the tree most people prefer, is they get a higher concentration of sugar. Sugar maple has 5%, silver maple 3%, and then box elders, which are part of the maple family, have 1.5. And that just tells you that it takes more water to boil off depending on how much sugar you have in there. So out at Minneopa, it's our bluebird houses tell us, okay, once spring arrives, in the fall of the year, the door is open. And the reason for that is to prevent mice from nesting in there. And then when we know that spring is coming, then the doors close, and then the bluebirds can start nesting. So I always think that's a good sign because I know somebody's been out there, usually one of our friends in Minneopa, and has closed them up. And then bird songs. And the reason I put the cardinal is because if you ever think about sleeping in late in the morning in the spring, this is the bird that's going to prevent you from doing it. It's just, I think, just crazy at how it just seems like there's got to be cardinals everywhere. Just that, sound that they make. And then the woodpeckers, this is the Paleated Woodpecker. And it's the drumming that we're starting to hear as they go into mating and things like this. This is our largest woodpecker in Minnesota. And it's one that you don't ever forget. And, they'll drum on everything. And a lot of times you hear them off the telephone poles. And then if you ever remember the cartoon Woody the Woodpecker, that was modeled after this one, and then the acorn woodpecker. But one of my favorite birds, I can remember being in North Dakota at Icelandic State Park, and one day it was a winter day, and I saw one, and I watched it. Must have been half an hour, 45 minutes, and I actually burned my eyes as the sun reflecting up into my eyeballs. But just beautiful bird. The other sign that I look for, and of course, as we're transitioning into spring, is the animals start recognizing that as they start to lose their fur. This is deer fur. And so you'll find this scattered around because they no longer need that thick coat as they're transitioning into spring. Bison are really easy. I should have included that one, is because there's molt almost where you get that really bunch of fur that's hanging on their coats and stuff like that as they go scratch on a tree or the fence or a rock to get it off. Shed antlers, not that they shed their antlers in the spring, but that's usually they shed them in the fall. We don't usually get to see them sometimes because snow pops up. And then in spring, we're out there looking and we see them. What's kind of amazing this year is I didn't even think about it. I had shared a photo of some bucks with females, and I think it was taken at the beginning of March, and they still had their antlers. So that's really unusual. And the guy that pointed it out said that that's a sign of climate change, that our winter wasn't as cold as it normally gets, and they did not shed their antlers. But there was actually 2 bucks, and they both still had their antlers on them.
Oh,
And then, like I said, the sound of frogs. And I think that's another thing we hear really a lot out at Minneopa. If you've been over to the group campground, there's that wetland in the middle. And we get into this time of year, and it just seems like that's all you hear is that sound of frogs mating. And it just seems so overwhelming at times. So if you have a wetland in your backyard or something, that might be another way to keep you from sleeping. And then we're getting our trees are starting to bud. I always feel kind of sorry sometimes because you start seeing them really bud out, and then we get hit with some colder weather. And this does affect some trees of flowering. We've seen this with apple trees where we've had warm weather early in the spring, say end of March. If you remember 2012, I think we were having 80-degree days in March, and then got hit with a cold spell, and that really affected the budding of those apple trees, and then of course apples actually growing. If you're out at Minneopa and you see what looks like a shrub that just has flowers and no leaves, that's the American plum. Their flowers are going to grow first, and that's really, I think, to me, because we have a lot of plum thickets around, seeing those start to pop up here and there. And then, of course, longer days. You think about December 21st, the shortest day of the year. I think we have a little over 8 hours of sunlight, and it's not that long. And then we see those days just getting longer and longer. So it's a good sign that we've moved out of winter and moving quickly towards summer. And new babies, everybody wants to know about the new babies. This is actually from our first 3 calves that were born in the spring of 2016. I think this was our first calf. It was April 22nd, I think is the day. We're not quite sure because we didn't know about it, but a trucker who was hauling gravel into our road was the one that first spotted it. But this was taken by our park manager, Craig Beckman. Just really a beautiful day. And you can see how the herd is protecting that one calf there. And then, of course, hatching of our birds. We have all these trail cameras or video cameras now, especially with the bald eagles. And they start to set up their nest, I think around February. And then they're laying their eggs and all that kind of jazz. So we know days are getting warmer because that's when we start having our babies and stuff like that. And really, like with bison, and I would imagine most animals, the earlier you're born in the spring, that gives you more time to grow and reach a sign of maturities before the next winter comes.
Say, Scott,
Yeah,
do we have any eagles out at the parks?
we do. We have a pair that's been nesting as long as I've been there, since 2012. If you walk along the Bluffline Trail,
Which one? Which park? Sorry.
Minneopa.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's on the campground side. So if you're walking along the bluff line, there's a trail that overlooks the Minnesota River. And just before, if you're walking towards the west, just before you get to the real first ravine, deep ravine, wooded ravine, as you're going down a steeper way, it's the bison fence stops there, and then it just moves to an angle back towards the south. If you look off to the north, there's a large cottonwood tree that holds an eagle's nest. I think there's probably now a path that will actually point it out where people have been standing and stuff like that. But it's down on the floodplain. So binoculars is a key if you're going to actually watch them. But they've been there nesting for years.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. And then of course, melting of our ice. And we definitely see this at Minneopa with the waterfalls and that just disappearing. We may have a little bit ice at night, but when the temperature gets below freezing, but otherwise we know that spring is on its way. And then usually, especially here in the Minnesota River Valley, that usually means flooding. We've been very fortunate, this year. And even if I remember, we had flooding last year. This is actually an interesting place. This is, if I remember right, over by Henderson. Is that where it is? I think it's Henderson. It's a high water mark from April 11th, 1965. But again, flooding is pretty common. The reason the Minnesota River Valley gets hit so badly is our river. The Minnesota River is relatively young in geological time, only about 10,000 years. And so it hasn't established its bank or its channel as much as, say, older rivers, and just that drop that the water has to take. So you just speeds that water up. And then we built bridges and we drain and stuff like that. So that just increases the chance of flooding. And that's, why Mankato has a dike, right, to prevent that. And then, of course, our time change. Everybody grumbles about it in the spring because we lost that hour of sleep. And we always welcome it in the fall because we gain an hour. It seems like more and more you hear people saying that it's time to get rid of the time change and move to just a regular without changing that. I had a friend of mine whose uncle always refused to honor the time change. He just, time was time. And so, in the fall of the year, dinner was just different compared to everybody else, or in spring or whatever it was. And I think there's other places in the country like Arizona that doesn't follow that time change. So it'll be interesting to see if that ever truly changes, because they've been talking about it for years. And then the sounds of insects. As they begin to emerge, we're starting to get our flowers popping up, and so pollinating. So we're going to see more and more of that as we go along. And so we have the bumblebee. The reason I put that one in there is because the reason for that hair or fur, whatever you want to call it on there, is to protect itself, because they're one of the early native bees that we're going to see. So again, it's those adaptations that allow it to come out earlier but still survive colder temperatures, because we all know that's going to happen. And then our monarchs are starting to migrate. So they have left Mexico, and they're on their way heading northward. So the thing with our monarchs is they actually have 4 generations. The first 3, they don't live as long, but it's moving up north. And then that 4th generation, that's what's born here and then farther north. And that's the generation that will make it all the way back to Mexico. So the first 3 getting up here, and then that last generation making its way back to Mexico. So on this side of the east side of the Rocky Mountains, they all go back to one spot. And that's why we worry about, one of the reasons we worry about monarchs, because if you can imagine, they're going to a spot that's only like 3 or 4 acres. So if any devastation thing happens, that could wipe out everything. Where on the west side of the Rockies, they don't have that one destination. They will overwinter in a number of different locations. And then there's other reasons that we worry about the monarchs. One is food. They just don't have as much habitat. We don't see as much milkweed growing, say, along fence lines and things like that, like we used to. But it's just amazing. It's our only insect that migrates all the way back. And then our dreaded mosquito, right? Good sign that spring has arrived and summer's not far behind, because They're going to start popping up. I haven't felt one yet, but I'm sure it's not that far away. One good thing is we're relatively dry, so maybe we won't have a big burst of mosquitoes. But wood ticks are already out. We're receiving reports from across the state, even in northern Minnesota. So we want to keep an eye on that, making sure that you're protecting yourself from that, especially not so much the wood tick, but the other ticks that provide or cause Lyme disease and things like that. And then our hibernating animals are emerging. And so, you can think black bear, though they're not a true hibernator. They will come out if they do get hungry or are disturbed. But animals like skunks, and I saw this, we went back to North Dakota last Friday, and I could not believe the amount of skunks sitting on the road dead. And so definitely they are coming out, and we're seeing more of that. That's a good sign, is the smell of skunks after somebody hits them on a car. Mud, right? And we're seeing rain and things like that, but as the ground unthaws, that's where we're getting really this mushy, really character to that. And so we're just going to see a lot more mud as things go by. And then if you've been out to Minneopa in the spring, we have sloppy parking lots. And Tim Peelis took this picture of the Waterfalls area parking lot, and it's just really a muddy mess. And we definitely hear about it from people. There's not much we can do about it, and that's why we always close that Bison Road. A lot of it's the frost is coming out. The gravel hasn't firmed up, and it's just soft. And what's happening with the Bison Range, that was never meant to be open during the winter. We would always close it and then open it up in the spring. And so we'll have a hard packed trail in the middle, but then on the sides, it'll be so mushy that people are getting stuck. So that's one of the reasons we close it, is just you can't have 2 lanes of traffic driving through there. It may look dry, especially on the end that you enter, but a lot of reasons because in other areas. And then prairie fires, and we've seen more of this year, even though we'll have snow on the ground. Once that melts, we still have that dead grass and other vegetation from last year. So easy to start a fire and get it going. This is actually a prescribed burn over in St. Peter at the St. Peter Treaty Center. I took this picture. This is Scott Siegfried, who actually just passed away. And another friend of mine saw it, and he goes, "That is a badass photo." I said, "That's the photo I want of me walking through a wall of flames." We haven't got hit by prairie fires as bad as if you've heard out in North Dakota. I have family out by Cross Ranch, which is on the Missouri River, and they had a fire go through there that actually burned up the railroad bridge. So it doesn't take much for fire, and that's why, especially in the spring, we get those windier days. They can take off pretty quickly. And then I'm going to say, if you come out to Minneopa, it means that there's a new coat of paint on just about everything. We have our longtime seasonal staff gets back, and they're antsy to get working, and a lot of days aren't all that productive because of the weather. And if you ever saw our 2 entrance signs, they were looking really terrible. And so they actually took them down, they power washed them, and we've had birds pecking at them, and so there was a lot of holes, and so they actually were able to put new styrofoam in there, and then they went someplace and got the paint to match exactly what, and they look like they're brand new. We've been talking about replacing them for years, and all it took was a power wash and a new coat of paint, and they look really good. So we need to figure out how to add the bison to the picture there. And then setbacks, right? we all think, spring is here, flowers are blooming, trees are blossoming, and then we get hit by snow. And we know that snow can come right in May. I'm from North Dakota, and we always say it snows just about every month. It can, the same way here in northern Minnesota. So don't put away the shovel quite yet, because it could still be happening. We're still only in the middle of April here. And so that was really my way to just kind of show what's just some signs of spring. And I don't know if anybody else wants to share what they consider their own sign of spring, or if you have questions about what I talked about.
One of the things that when you were listing birds, where we're at, there's an area of water. It's not a huge area, but we get swans in there that come through. And I always feel it's spring when we see a pair of swans, and then it's fall when we see them back.
Right. Yeah, that's good with the birds. Like, they're telling us when winter is leaving and when winter's coming back. But yeah, I forgot about the swans. Yeah, I guess they've been hanging out. Somebody said on the Minnesota River that quite a bit. So that is, yeah, a good sign of spring. Thank you.
Scott, this is Missy. Can you tell me, have you seen the pileated woodpeckers at Minneopa?
Yeah. We have one that's behind our office. There's a trail that's an old, kind of old road. The family that had lived there before we built the office had a field up on top of the hill. And when I walk back in there, I usually can find him or her there. Otherwise, the campground, the group campground, I've never seen them there, but I know they're there because look for the trees that are pretty much just destroyed. You know, they'll have the holes that are, a couple inches deep, 4 feet long. Then you know that they're the pileated woodpeckers are out there. So we have them at Minneopa. And up here in Skyline, I see them every now and then when I'm walking around too.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Scott, do you want to talk about kind of the rhythm of the park? When things open up, when they close, and what the outlook is for this year as far as we hope post-pandemic?
Yeah, so we do allow camping year round, but usually it's about this time of year people are getting antsy. Our one main campground, A-Loop, is closed, I think, until May 1st. And then we'll be opening up the bathroom right before usually Memorial Day. Last year, we did not open up the bathroom at the Waterfalls because of staffing. We had less staff, but this year we're back to pretty close to full staff. And I would imagine that will be opening up here soon. So usually this, we're waiting because our water lines are not very deep into the ground. So we always shut that off. So that's another good sign of spring that's happening is when our bathrooms open up that have water, because then we can do that. So as the office, we're seeing that. I was out there a couple weeks ago and they had the office open up. I would imagine we're going to do it where it's like last year, where it was what we call the ice cream window. So you just come up to the window and you pay. And I don't see that opening the actual office area just because it's so tight quarters and things like that. So the other signs, of course, are we're hauling in gravel, trying to repair our roads and things like that. And I will be doing programming. We're going to be talking about that on Wednesday. So not quite sure, but I will probably be offering at least evening programs. My idea is do evening programs. We're going to do it again, limited sign up kind of thing. I'm hoping to do some hikes, those kind of things. And then last year I spent time up at Setman Mill for a couple hours just talking to people as they come through, because we have Tim Pulis doing our Bison ambassadorship. So I usually work on top after him for a couple hours. So those are probably things, no archery, no things that we're going to be handling gear. They're saying no paddling. I'm going to try to see if I can persuade them that that might be an okay thing to do. We'll see what they, because we just have to follow the guidance of the governor. We don't really have much choice and things like that. So I'm thinking Memorial Day weekend is when we'll start doing our programming. And then at Minneopa, I'll be there at least one Saturday a month, because then I'll have, of course, Flandreau and Fort Ridgely to take care of too.
Sure. Okay.
But yeah, I think that, things are moving forward, and we're gonna. It sounds like it's still really busy, even as more things open up. People have found or discovered state parks, and I think we'll continue with that trend.
I was at Lake Chetek a few weekends ago now, and it was certainly nice. I mean, very early in the year, of course, so there's not all of the beauty, but I'll be back there later when it's in full bloom.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is really, if you want to see wildflowers before everything else comes up, this is a great time. And the gorge at Minneopa, walking down into the gorge, the Waterfalls area is where you're going to see a lot of waterflowers.
Sure. Anybody else have any questions for Scott? Well, looks pretty quiet, Scott.
Well, thanks everybody.
And thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to have you here to talk about the treasure that is Minneopa State Park, and in this case, the seasons. So who knows, maybe we'll bring you back for, well, we've done bats and opossums. And
well, I do have a few more new programs I'll send you
okay,
that you might be interested, that I just created here. And now we'll see if my nephew Kyle finds this video, because if he does, I'll hear about it.
maybe he put in for notifications from us, so every time we post one, he'll find out about it.
All right.
All right, one last call for any questions that people have. If not, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Have a great
Thank
day.
you.
Maybe we'll do one in the fall.
All right. All right. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.